Welcome to everybody, and joining us tonight on Sangha Night for a talk as part of our series on Dharma for difficult times. As Machivasan said, I'm in the community in Vajramandala in the living room, and there's 4 people here, which is great. So I've got people over here to talk to, and I've got notes here. So at times I think I'll be going like this, but yeah. So okay, so Virya. So last week we had those 5 really wonderful talks from Sangha members. And the week before, you might remember that Maitri Dasa gave a really great talk about Kshanti, or forbearance, or patience. And if you missed that, all the short talks, they are online. You can watch them on the Sheffield Buddhist Centre online website and on the YouTube channel. And the quality that Maitri Dasa talked about, which is Kshanti, of forbearance, is usually paired with another quality, Virya. And this talk is about Virya. So it's a Sanskrit word which means energy, vigour, ardour. So yeah, energy, vigour, ardour for the good, And both Kshanti and Virya, the way that we're talking about them, come from an amazing text that was written back in the 8th century India by a monk called Shantideva. And they're 2 of what are called the perfections. And the perfections are also could be translated as being the ways to go beyond, to pass over, to go beyond ourselves. And they're practices that are recommended for people who are training to be bodhisattvas. So the text is a guide to how to become a bodhisattva. So you've probably heard people talking about bodhisattvas, this sublime ideal of a human being. It might be the most sublime, perhaps, thing that a human being can aspire to. A human being whose whole life is oriented around gaining enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, for those millions and billions and billions of sentient beings. And I'm going to spend a bit of time now describing the Bodhisattva, because I think it's really important to hold a vision of what a human being can become, what we can become, what I can become, and what you can become. So the Bodhisattva lives in a state of spontaneous, compassionate activity. So the Bodhisattva is spontaneously free of the ego, free of the drives of craving and or aversion, which is what often drives our own spontaneity, actually. They're free of those drives. And a Bodhisattva doesn't feel that there's any essential difference between themselves and other beings, because they see that we're all just equally alive, equally precious. So I can imagine a Bodhisattva is be flooded by this appreciation of life all the time. And hopefully, we've all had glimpses of that, of a way of living, of a way of appreciating just other people and other beings just for existing, a kind and an open and a very beautiful way to live. So what bodhisattvas can do is they can enter a situation where there's suffering in the world, and just to be of whatever benefit they can be. And apparently for a bodhisattva, this is like play. So the traditional simile that's used is that bodhisattvas throw themselves into compassionate activity, like elephants throw themselves into cool pools in the forest on a really hot day. And you've probably seen pictures, or you might have really seen elephants washing themselves, kind of filling their trunks with water and just playfully splashing themselves all over the place. And they also love eating lotus stalks and lotuses. So for them, it's a complete delight to be in a lotus pond. So for a bodhisattva, their action, their spontaneous action is just like that. It's completely delightful, because they get so much satisfaction out of just meeting beings where they are and being able to be of benefit. And Sangharakshita, who's the founder of the Triratna Buddhist movement, says, having completely transformed oneself in accordance with one's original vision, one's vision of reality, one is then in a position really to help others. One could also say that this is also a stage of spontaneity, where you don't think what you're going to do to help others, at least not in the ordinary way. You just spontaneously function. You do what needs to be done. There's a sort of overflow of your fully enlightened being. So it brings to mind a fountain. So the Bodhisattva is giving from a full cup, a positive overflow of inspiration, love, wisdom. So maybe I think this state of the Bodhisattva, this being who's coursing in the wisdom and the compassion of enlightenment, it is hard to understand. It's said that the activity of enlightened bodhisattvas is completely spontaneous. They're deeply moved by suffering, but the action that comes from being moved by suffering is not grim or serious or heavy-hearted. It is a play. And we've probably all had our own experiences being moved by suffering and then acting very immediately without a thought for ourselves. And that's not a difficult thing. In fact, it can be really joyful. So this is part of the bodhisattva, the spontaneous expression of heartfelt compassion. And it's effortless because there's no ego holding them back. So what a beautiful idea of the bodhisattva, especially in the current situation we're in. Someone who can spontaneously and naturally, playfully even, be of help and of service to those who are suffering. So that's the ideal that really speaks to me. But then I find myself in my current state. So I find that I'm really annoyed with the person in the supermarket who isn't doing the social distancing thing. I'm full of righteous indignation about politicians and their advisors. I'm craving, when can I go on holiday? When can I get to the seaside? When can I get myself out into the countryside? I'm experiencing unhelpful prapancha thoughts about an uncertain future for us all. So basically, with all of those, I'm stuck in self-obsession. I'm far away from that sublime ideal that I described. So what are we to do? So it's a good thing we have this guide from Shantideva, this guide how to move from where we are now, from where I am now, to the state of the Bodhisattva. So that's what the Bodhicharya Avatara is. It's a guide on how to move from being like a self-obsessed person who's causing havoc and suffering wherever I go, to being a Bodhisattva, spontaneously, playfully, full of compassionate activity. And developing Virya is one of the ways that we can train to be a Bodhisattva. And we can do it whatever our conditions are. We can always find a way to find some energy for the good. So Virya, as I said, means energy for the good, vigour, effort, ardour. And it's really crucial that we notice that it's energy for the good. So the good is what moves us towards enlightenment. It's not that enemy, I don't know if it's a near enemy or a far enemy of neurotic activity. Because I think in our society, we've got some quite unhelpful ideas and conditioning about what is and isn't laziness. So energy for the good isn't rushing about doing lots, driven by anxiety. It's not always keeping ourselves busy, never stopping doing stuff until we collapse and have to distract ourselves in order to get some rest. There's a great quote from a Tibetan teacher called Gampopa, who defines gross laziness as addiction to the activities of making money and subduing enemies. So I guess in our time that could be business and politics. It's like career. It's addiction to being active in that way in the world. And in the lockdown, it's interesting because some people have had the experience of doing less forced on them. And I know that's not been everybody's experience. But for those who have had that experience of having less to do, many people have said to me how doing less has led to more enjoyable states of mind, more concentrated, more open states. People talking about really being able to enjoy nature, having a real sense of awareness and mindfulness. So doing less has led to more virya, more positive states of mind. So one of the reasons why this anxious compulsive activity, which many of us find ourselves in, could be called laziness, is because any kind of life which is making no attempt to evolve is an escapist life. Okay, if what we're doing with our life is spending loads of energy just on kind of getting more things, having more experiences, that's an escapist life. We're not actually trying to evolve and grow in the way that we can grow. And but I think I need to be clear that I'm not saying that Virya is just about doing nothing or doing less. Of course I'm not. I mean, for instance, without a lot of work from many people, so like Edward, Arya Dasa, Maitrevasin, Vidanya, and the rest of the team, we wouldn't be enjoying Sangha night tonight. So effort does need to be made. So I've been really taken with the image of a really skilled surfer catching a huge wave. So I can imagine that much effort would go on for years to learn how to surf. how to balance on the board. I have tried it myself for about an hour and never managed to learn how to do it. But I can imagine people just, spending a long time, they're learning how to surf, how to balance, how to understand how the waves work, to understand the currents in the sea, the weather, how to paddle out, putting a lot of effort, how to be in the right place to catch the waves, starting with small waves and gradually building up until one day the surfer's able to be ready to be caught by a big wave, a massive wave, to be taken by something bigger and not to be overwhelmed with it. And so the surfer can ride that wave and keep their balance right to the shore. So I have the sense of Virya, of being like, we need to put in effort until we are caught and we no longer need to put in the same kind of effort. So there's loads to be said on Virya. And actually, there's a really great talk by Padmavajra, who gave a talk to us a few weeks ago. He's like a friend to the centre, which you can find on YouTube. And he talks about Virya in a series that he's doing on the Bodhicharyavatara. And from his talk, I'm taking a few bits and pieces. And one of them is how I've just lost his name, Shantideva, talks about traditional ways, the powers, they're called, 4 traditional powers that encourage and develop our Virya. And I'm going to talk about those briefly, they're not in the traditional order actually. So the first power that can help us develop our Virya, which is our energy for the good, is the power of desire, the power of desire. And that's because when we really want something, when we really desire something, we'll make huge efforts to get it. And you can probably look back on your own life and see when that has been true of you. And you might be thinking, but desire, surely Buddhists have a bit of an issue about desire. And it's true that desire for sense pleasure does get us in a lot of messes, a lot of times, but we can't get away from the fact that we are beings made up of desire. It's our emotions that usually drive us. And if our emotions, if our desire isn't engaged, we're just not going to be able to practice over a long period of time. So there's a classic quote from Sangharakshita: "The central problem of the spiritual life is finding emotional equivalence to our intellectual understanding." Say that one again. "The central problem of the spiritual life is finding emotional equivalence to our intellectual understanding." So basically it's saying we might know in our heads what we'd like to do with our lives, or what would be good for us, what would be helpful for us. I'd like to be kinder, I'd like to be more patient. But actually it's not until we have a strong emotional desire, we really connect with that we're going to put the practice in. So it's not until I really feel that I really want to be more patient that I'm going to start doing the metta bhavana more regularly to help me become kinder, to have be more patient with people. And it's interesting, that phrase, isn't it, that we say about people. We say someone's heart isn't in it, so nothing's happening. So if somebody's engaged in something, you might say, well, the heart's not really in it. I think that shows how we really need to have this emotion. We need to have our desires behind what we're doing. And another way of saying this is saying that the spiritual life is about slowly and gradually moving our desire away from sensory pleasures to the desire for the Dharma and the life that goes with the Dharma. So in Sanskrit, that's moving from Kama Chanda to Dharma Chanda, Chanda meaning desire. So from desire for sense pleasures to desire for the pleasures of the Dharma, of the life of working towards becoming a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. So what we need to do is cultivate this Chanda, our Dharma Chanda, our motivation, our desire to practice. So it's moving from our heads into our hearts and actually into our guts. So we just really know it deep down. So there's a few ways we can do that. We could do it by reflecting on what we don't want from our lives, or what we don't want to be. So I don't want to live a life that's at the mercy of advertising, merchandising, and whatever the current fad is. I don't want to live a life where I'm just pushed around by my likes and my dislikes. I want to be able to, as I get older, when I fall ill, when I face my own death or that of other of loved ones, I don't want to have extra suffering going on because of the way that my mind tells me stories about that. I want to have the strength, the wisdom and the compassion to be able to face those very difficult situations as well as I can. So we can reflect on, how we want to be, and we can reflect on what we want. So we might have, I think, the beauty and ease of a skillful life. A clear conscience. How lovely it is when we feel, when our conscience is clear, when we know we're acting in accord with our ethical principles. The deep pleasure of honest and open communication with our friends. So those times when we can talk about things that are really important to us with our friends. So able to be really of use to suffering beings. That's something I'm sure a lot of us would want. So when I find myself in a difficult situation like a global pandemic, I want to have the tools of my practice, mindfulness, metta, an understanding of impermanence, an understanding of dukkha, of suffering. I want to have those tools to be able to help me. Something else I really, I'm just going to go on to joy in a little bit, but before we go on to that, I'm just going to say that in the groups, you might want to talk about what do you really want? What's the questions? What do you really want from your lives? What really motivates you? What really motivates you? So having reflected on Chandra, or our motivation, our desire, the next power sort of fits well after that, because it's the power of delight or joy. So we need to find out, we won't be able to keep practicing if we don't find delight and joy in our practice. We need to find what gives us delight and joy in the Dharma life. And we need to do more of it if we want to increase our Virya. So we can explore what gives us joy. Is it the joy of hearing the Dharma really articulate the way that things really are? Is it this sublime vision of the Bodhisattva? Is it ritual and puja? Being with other people who've got similar interests to us, studying the Dharma together. It might be other very skillful ways that we find delight of joy, which is being in nature, the arts, so music, art, literature. That might be something else to talk about in groups. What brings us joy? What's skillful? And what can we do more of? Because I think sometimes I can have a bit of a puritanical feel about my practice, probably from conditioning, that it ought to be hard. If I'm practicing, and that joy is not really appropriate. But of course we need joy and delight as humans. And in a way, the figure of the Buddha to me is one of the most joyful figures there could be. And so that's something that we can be looking for. So then the third one I'm going to talk about is the power of letting go. So this is the third power that helps us develop Virya. So the Bodhicharyavatara says, when one's energy begins to flag, one should put one's work down. So what it's saying is we need periods of rest. We need to let go. But when we let go, we need to really let go. We need to really abandon our to-do lists and our planning. So it's not like we stop, take the weekend off or something, but then we continue to worry. We need to be able to let go. And if you've, in Padmavajra's talk, he talks about Sangharakshita on a retreat, letting go and just being really happy to look at the sky. Apparently he just sat in a chair and looked at the sky for quite a long period of time. And I'm about to start a solitary retreat at home tomorrow. And those words really spoke to me. I thought, can I really let go of all those things I think about so that I can properly engage with my solitary and I can properly rest myself in some ways? Because if we rest well, then we can come back and we can pick up our next project with new energy when we're rested. So just like those elephants jumping in and out of those lakes, it's a bit like we rest and then we can jump into a new lake, a new lotus pool. So the fourth power is the power of pride, or mana in Sanskrit, pride. And pride's not normally seen as a helpful state of mind because it's seen as being conceit. It's a comparison. We might think we're better than somebody else, or we might think we're worse than somebody else. But here by pride, Shantideva means a positive state of mind, a very positive self-respect. And having a positive self-respect will have a few consequences. So the first is we're more likely to complete what we start, because we know that if we don't complete what we start, we're going to undermine our self-respect. We're going to have a lack of confidence. And actually, completing what we start is a really good way of building Virya, because it's like we're really building that muscle of being able to commit and complete what we do. I think it also helps because having the sense of pride, because sometimes practicing the Dharma is hard. It might be a bit countercultural. Some of the people we are close to might not support what we're doing. We might start to doubt ourselves as well. We might just start to think, how can I do this? How can I even think about moving more towards being like a bodhisattva, taking those first steps? But the Buddha said that everyone can get enlightened. So Presumably we have some faith in the Buddha, and he said that everyone can. So there's no reason why we are that one special person who can't. So we can have positive pride in ourselves, that we have the potential to become Buddhas ourselves. And a positive pride can also allow us to think, well, if I've been lucky enough, I've come across the Dharma, I've come across the community of people practicing the Dharma. If I don't do what I can, who will? Who will? If I don't do it, who else is there? So I might feel that I'm inadequate for whatever work it is that we do, for our practice. We probably are inadequate for what we do, but actually if we don't do it, who will? You know, we've been so lucky to hear about the Dharma and how it can affect our lives and help other people. So if we're not developing more kindness, more awareness, more spacious mind, who's going to do it? And the world, as we know, really needs more kindness, more awareness. Okay, so now I'm going to just move on to another couple of thoughts that I had about Virya. So interestingly, the thing I think that's probably really helped me the most is not mentioned in the Bodhicharyavatara, which is how helpful supportive conditions are. How much, you know, the conditions really support you. And I wonder if that's because Shantideva was a monk and he was speaking to other monks who all lived in a massive university, a massive monastery. So they had those kind of conditions anyway. But we probably found in lockdown that our conditions affect our mind, our state of mind quite a lot, well, massively. And it really is, I think, the condition of putting myself in helpful and supportive conditions is the one that's helped me develop Virya, mostly this energy for the good. So that's thinking about where I live, who I live with, where I work, what work I do, who I spend my time with, and how I spend my time. I mean, one thing that we can't do at the moment, of course, is go on retreat, which is a really helpful thing to do if you haven't done that, because then we can experience spending all day for several days in good conditions, perhaps even for several months in good conditions. But we can try at the moment, we could try online retreats. So I haven't done one, but quite a few people have reported to me how helpful they are. There's a short piece by Maitri Vasan on the website, on the online website, talking about his experience of doing an online retreat. And Mokhtara did one last week as well, and reported about how actually it was very helpful to do one at home. So you could explore, there are many online retreats out there and you could explore those. So there's something about, if we really want to achieve this extraordinary potential we've got, we need to be putting ourselves in the right conditions. So is it possible that we can spend more time with other people who also want to practice the Dharma? If we're not already, can we work in an ethical livelihood? Can we connect more with our friends in the Sangha? And of course, at the moment, a lot of that we have to do online, but that's also important. Okay, so just before we end-ish, I'm just going to throw in what I've learned from a very different set of practices that I've been following over lockdown, which is the Couch to 5K running program, which is produced by the NHS. So it's like, if you haven't come across it, it's this gradual training in running, where you slowly up the amount of running you do every week. So we've just finished week 8, and we're going to move tomorrow to the last week, where, all being well, we'll run for 30 minutes without stopping. Which, seeing as when I started, I was running for 90 seconds without stopping, is just amazing. And I do think there are some overlaps in what I've learned from that. Obviously, this is a very mundane example, but it also applies to Virya as well. So the first thing is this slow and steady practice, developing energy for the good. I think Padma has a phrase about, it's not a slash and burn. It's not like we rush in with masses of energy and we just sort it out. It's like it takes time. So as I said, 9 weeks ago, I was only running for 90 seconds, and then I walked. And the same with Virya. So Shantideva suggests we start small. So for instance, if we're trying to develop the energy of dana, of giving things away, maybe we start by giving things away we don't really mind, like vegetables. That's what he suggests. And then we can give more and more and more, until one day he says we could actually just give our flesh and it wouldn't be an issue to us. So Virya is developed slowly, just like running is. So it's been really important part of the running that I've rested between each run for at least one a day. And we've heard that that's a really important part of Virya as well, that we need to be resting well in between what we do. I was able to follow a clear and structured program doing my running, and that's like the Dharma gives us. There's all those pathways, you know, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Threefold Path, lots of ways that we can look at following a gradual path of practice. Times, actually, even though I enjoyed it, I had to use willpower to keep going. So there's a kind of weird thing that I've been doing the last few days, weeks, which is when I've noticed my body is pretend running. It's kind of just pretending to run, even though I wasn't really. And I had to use my willpower to kind of go, no, I can do this last 5 or 6 minutes or whatever as I'm growing stronger. So we do sometimes have to use our willpower in developing Virya, in working towards being a bodhisattva. And it was generally very pleasurable, actually. I think that's what got me out a lot. You know, we saw the blossom growing on the trees, more recently the ducklings. We had a lot of pleasure doing it together. Feeling stronger muscles is pleasurable. The feeling after the run was great. My body feeling really alive was great. And similar pleasures that we can have in our spiritual practice, that we can feel more alive. We can be really happy to see how we've progressed. I did have to put energy in. I had to put quite a lot of energy in to overcome my inertia to get going most days that we were running. But once we got going, I really found myself with a lot more energy than I'd thought, and it's given me energy. But I think most of all, I had a sangha to run with. I had a friend to run with, because I ran with Vicky every day. And I plodded along, because Vicky's 23, and she kind of zoomed about. But without Vicky, without my sangha, without my friend, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have got to it. So I think for me, that just shows how it's important that we have other people that we do whatever we do with. Okay, so I've covered some of the ways that we can develop our Virya. You might have your own experiences that you might want to bring to that, your own mundane experiences of learning new things. And the questions for the groups would be how we could talk about how we might develop our own energy. What do we really want from our lives? And where do we find joy and delight in our practice of the Dharma and being in the Sangha? And I'm going to finish completely with a poem by Sangharakshita. As I said, if you want to explore Virya some more, there's this great talk about Virya by Padmavajra, and he finishes with this poem too. So I think the poem is like a different way of expressing it, but it reminds me of that image of the skilled surfer, the experienced surfer being caught by the wave and surfing in. So the poem is called The Wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me, its breath, my breath, its will, my will.